I welcome you to South Sudan first side event at the COP28. The topic of our discussion today is navigating challenges in South Sudan regarding the climate change, disasters, and conflict. And it is my pleasure to announce that the Honorable Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management, Albino Okol Atak, the main guest speaker in this side event, is with us. Minister, you are welcome. Alongside my minister, we have also Minister Pal Mai, the Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation in the Republic of South Sudan. Minister, you are most welcome. The program for today will start with a video and a presentation, then followed by a statement from the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management. After that, we'll have a brief panel discussion with very prominent leaders in the area of DRR, regionally and globally. I will introduce them when time comes. But now, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what is happening in South Sudan and why did we choose the interplay of disasters, climate change, and conflict. The video.
South Sudan is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, including both long-term changes such as the gradual increase on temperature and short-term extreme climate events like increased flooding. The conflict in Sudan has forced more than 240,000 South Sudanese and Sudanese people to flee to South Sudan.
When we went there in Kiradem specifically, an area that is very far from town of Awil, the influx of returnees and refugees that we got is estimated to be 15,000, both returnees and refugees. And returnees and refugees are almost have equal number. For instance, the number of refugees alone is 7,500, an estimation. And the returnees have about 7,000 something.
The government of South Sudan seeks more funding to respond to the influx of returnees and refugees fleeing the conflict in Sudan.
The needs is very huge, the influx in big numbers, so we need all of us to come in very quickly so that we rescue our people. This is our responsibility as the government and the partners that we need to rescue our people who are coming. And we should not actually sit behind and look at these people while they are suffering. We need to take up our responsibility and we intervene immediately.
Thank you, tech team. The video showed two elements: the impact of the climate change, which has resulted in flooding, and then the accommodation of conflict. So now I will call upon Honorable Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management to deliver his statement. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the conference of the parties COP28 comes at a backdrop of huge humanitarian suffering attributed to the consequences of climate change. Although number of deaths and the impact of the climate shock have reduced significantly due to improved early warning system, improved awareness and infrastructure, nevertheless, the increase in the frequency of disasters has disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable communities, especially in the rural areas worldwide. This trend is disturbing, and it is challenging our efforts to avoid the imminent consequences of climate change. A rapid conclusion could mean there is something that we are not doing right. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, even though we think we are better prepared than before, we all witnessed the recent earthquakes in Turkey and Morocco that killed thousands of people, destroyed homes and the infrastructure, and displaced another thousands of people. The situation in South Sudan is not different. The country is covered with the thick equatorial vegetation and savanna grassland. The average temperature range between 18 to 35 degrees centigrade, with the hottest month in February and March. and the coldest month from July to August. Current projections indicate that temperatures could increase by 0.6 to 1.7 degrees centigrade by 2030, and by 1.7 to 3.1 degrees by 2060. This is a very worrying picture for all of us. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, because of this rapid climate change, in the last 4 years, the people of South Sudan have experienced unprecedented wave of climate shocks in the form of floods caused by heavy rains, exposed floods, plains, and overflow of River Nile. About 1 million or even 2 are impacted by these floods every year, from displacement, loss of livelihoods, and properties. Excellencies, the impact of floods in South Sudan are exacerbated by the current conflict in Sudan. Since the eruption of the conflict in Sudan on 14th April 2023, the government of South Sudan, IOM, and UNHCR have recorded more than 410,000 people who cross the borders from Sudan into South Sudan. Most of the people crossing into South Sudan are women and children. They cross the border with nothing or with limited life-saving materials. This has mounted more pressure on the weak economy caused by many factors, including war in Ukraine and the global decline in oil price. Excellencies, because of the unfolding situation in Sudan, plus other problems facing my country, we have taken the following actions to alleviate the situation. One, being a new country striving to develop, we have embarked on the institutional establishment of new institutions to lead the country into better condition after coming out from the civil wars that went on for some decades. The civil wars destroyed the infrastructure, displaced people, and deprived citizens from economic growth and prosperity. Two, we have established disaster risk management policy, disaster risk reduction strategy, and we are currently in advanced stages in development of disaster risk management bill. All these frameworks are developed through popular consultative measures with all stakeholders and at-risk communities. These instruments are also aligned with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, including the African Union Programme of Action on Disaster Risk Reduction, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Excellencies, with these instruments in place, we have established structures to implement these, and they are: one, the National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction 2016, two, the National Early Warning Working Group, and three, the Disaster Risk Management Committees at both national and local levels. Excellencies, despite these significant steps, yet South Sudan faces, inter alia, the following challenges. Lack of adequate capacities to implement the objectives of this institutional framework is one. Two, lack of basic infrastructure needed to monitor weather conditions and climate patterns. Two, increased vulnerability to climate change as 3, and 4, increase the number of people who needs humanitarian assistance due to conflict in Sudan. These challenges trigger dire humanitarian condition in the country, and with this picture in mind, we have taken the following actions to remedy the situation. We have just launched South Sudan Humanitarian Needs Appeal worth $1.8 billion United States dollars to support the vulnerable people with the most pressing needs. Also, we are in consultation with our stakeholders, including the UN system, IGAD, and our peace partners to establish the Special Reconstruction Fund as stipulated, fund in Chapter 3 of the Revitalized Agreement on the Resolution of Conflict in South Sudan, 2018. This will assist the people most impacted by the conflict in South Sudan in December 2013. Furthermore, we have approved the Kampala Convention on the Rights of the Internally Displaced People. In addition, the government has developed and approved the National Durable Solution Strategy and Plan of Action for the returnees, refugees, internally displaced people, and the host communities. The government, through the Ministry of Finance and Planning and the local government board, signed a grant agreement with the World Bank to support the most vulnerable population through enhancing capacities in the hotspots areas mostly affected by floods. This month, we launched an important project, the Early Warning for All initiative, supported by the UN Disaster Risk Reduction and UNDP. We are grateful to the entire leadership of the United Nations and the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction for considering the people of South Sudan to benefit from this support, which is enhancing early warning for all. Also, last week in Addis Ababa, the government of South Sudan signed the African Risk Capacity Treaty, and we are now ready to sign the MOU for the same, which will pave the way for South Sudan to access financial funds to support the most vulnerable citizens through the access to insurance fund. Excellencies, in conclusion, I must admit that these ambitious actions cannot come to fruition unless we improve to working together as one team. I need to take this opportunity to give a special thanks to the leadership of the African Union Commission for giving the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management to showcase to the world what we are doing and the challenges we face. This is a clear recognition of the role of South Sudan in promoting disaster risk reduction agenda globally and regionally. I also take this opportunity to say thank you to all partners, especially donors, South Sudan Red Cross, International Federation of Red Cross, IOM, UNHCR, WFP, the AU Commission, and the IGAD, and all the humanitarian agencies supporting the vulnerable people in South Sudan through different means. I want to thank those partners whom, without their support, we could have not made it to participate in the COP28 and to have this opportunity to have such wonderful side event for the first time since we began participating in the COP 5 years ago. Finally, I'm appealing to all the donors, despite the competing challenges and the priorities in funding allocations, to support the people of South Sudan in overcoming current humanitarian situation before it could turn into a global emergency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for the concise statement, which clarified the role and challenges faced by the Republic of South Sudan in supporting the fight against the climate change and its impact, and also the conflict. The next session will be an interesting one, that we have heard what is happening in South Sudan, the challenges and the efforts. I would like to introduce three very important, prominent speakers. And as the minister just indicated, without these three people, we wouldn't be here today. They supported us a long way since the adoption of the Sendai framework in the Sendai city in Japan, 2015. We have come a long way with the UNDRR, whom supported now senior government officials to come to this forum. The capacity building through IGAD and ICPAC is much appreciated. And as the minister also indicated, our partners, despite that we still have some challenges that are behind us in everything. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Lorita Haiba. I hope I pronounced the last name properly, from the UNDRR in Geneva. So you are most welcome, and you can take the floor, please. Our second panelist will be Dr. Gulet Artan, the director of ICPAC, based in Nairobi. Dr. Artan, you are most welcome. Our third panelist today is one of my friends and a leading specialist in DRR. I hope he's getting me, he's online. Mr. Lucas, can you get me, please? Can you hear me, Lucas?
Good afternoon. We've lost the audio. I cannot hear the room. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I hear you loud and clear, Lucas.
Okay, yes, now I hear you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, honorables.
Is it good morning or good afternoon, or both?
It's good afternoon. I'm based in Addis.
Okay, you are lucky
I'm
today.
also hearing the simultaneous translation, so apologies for my delayed response.
No worries. I hope the translation, English and French are in place. Okay, thank you, Lucas. We have the translation. So, my first question, while they are preparing the tech preparing team, my question to Loretta of the UNDRR is how the protection of women, youth, boys and girls, and persons with disability issues will be addressed, given the combination of climate change, disasters, and conflict. And from the video, you have seen the most affected are women and children. So you can see also what would be the position of the disabled people. That question goes to Loretta. The second question will go to Dr. Atan of ICPAC. South Sudan is one of the countries under the UN Global Program on early warning for all. And early warning is very important or key to have proper anticipatory action planning. What support can South Sudan receive to strengthen the early warning and climate services from IGAD or ICPAC? The third question goes to my friend, Lucas, of the World Bank Group. Returnees in South Sudan also became flood victims returnees from the conflict also became flood victims. And in the past 4 years, floods, thus the number of IDPs increased. How can these challenges of climatic impact be addressed? Would skill-based livelihoods, training, and cash-based program linking be an option for a durable solution for IDPs, especially for women and youth? So I will begin with Loretta. Loretta, your question is how the protection of women, youth, boys and girls, and persons with special needs or disability be addressed in the context of climate change, disasters, and conflict. Loretta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I first worked in South Sudan around 7 years ago, and I visited many of the camps that we saw here while I was working with OCHA. I now work with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So when the question came to me about how will women and girls and persons with disability be protected as we address the climate emergency in contexts such as South Sudan, which is also facing a conflict situation, I was really gratified that we'd have the opportunity to speak about this, and also that this was the first question that you were asking to this panel, because these are the groups that are really most at risk in these situations of what we call compounded vulnerability, where on the one hand they are facing the consequences of conflict, which often manifests itself in terms of displacement, but additionally they are at risk of losing their livelihoods through recurrent, repeated disaster events, such as the flooding that we know takes place regularly in Africa, or increasing extreme weather events such as drought. I would maybe like to start with a rather sobering figure, and that is that more than 600 million women and girls lived in conflict-affected areas in 2022. This is a 50% increase since 2017. So the situation, unfortunately, is getting worse, not better, and this really requires us to double down on our efforts to put in place measures that will help ensure that protection is at the forefront of our programming and planning. We know that women in particular confront really increasingly complex situations because of the multiple layers of climate shocks, chronic vulnerabilities, and also endemic poverty, which is also made worse by climate change. It also is very apparent that climate change is having an impact on gender roles and power relations. Nonetheless, we do think that there are important entry points that need to be looked at. For example, of the 18 peace agreements that were reached in 2022, it was only the Khartoum peace agreement between the Sudan People's Liberation Movement and government and the other forces that were signed or had a representative of a women's group or organization. So this is just to give you an example of the type of peace negotiations that are happening in Africa, on the African continent, and elsewhere in the world, in which women are not necessarily part of the negotiations or even bearing witness to this. So a very first area of work that we would really like to see strengthened is women's engagement in peace building and in peacekeeping initiatives. One good piece of news is that in South Sudan, women made up 41% of participants in local peace initiatives supported by the peacekeeping mission, and this is an increase of 30% in 2021. So really, more efforts is needed to ensure the meaningful participation and leadership of women and women's organizations. One of the very critical issues that we see a need for greater attention is the risk of gender-based violence and how this is addressed, and how climate change compounded with conflict really increases the risk of gender-based violence. And according to the 2024 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan for South Sudan, an estimated 2.5 million people, and this includes girls, boys, and women, risk GBV challenges. So they are at risk of gender-based violence in 2024. This is exacerbated by high levels of food insecurity, economic instability, unemployment, school closures, high levels of maternal mortality. And climate change, again, is exacerbating this because it's leading to higher levels of displacement. And displacement is also a challenging, I would say, trigger for gender-based violence. Now, what are we doing and what are some of the actions that are taking place? Well, one of them is that UNDRR specifically is supporting better analysis of risks in countries such as South Sudan. And in South Sudan, very specifically, we have been undertaking joint risk analysis between development and humanitarian actors, and really trying to understand risk in all of its dimensions. It's not just the hazards that are associated with climate change, which of course we know are growing, becoming more unpredictable, but also the exposure and vulnerability, because that is what is leading to a heightened risk profile for South Sudan. And bearing this in mind, we are trying to ensure that all of the planning that is taking place, whether it's the humanitarian response plan or the common country analysis or the climate change adaptation plan or DRR planning, really has a robust understanding of the risk and the risks that the country is facing now, but also the risks that will be further imposed by the changing climate. I would like to say maybe just a few words about youth, because this was one of the questions that was asked. In fact, South Sudan has an asset insofar as it has a young population. And so it's very critical that the youth are provided the opportunities such as education, which is a massive priority, to move forward, vocational training, and also psychosocial support. You know, a country that is emerging from a long period of conflict has obviously a real need to ensure that the youth are healthy, and that includes also their mental health. We are supporting through the UN system multiple endeavors to increase community engagement, addressing young people, and really to ensure that they have opportunities for employment and that conflict and engaging in conflict is not the only option for them. In terms of disability, there are currently 1.2 million people living with disabilities in South Sudan. About a fifth of these are impairments that have been caused by violence in the country. And so ensuring that people living with disabilities are reached through all humanitarian development programming is of critical importance. But also, again, it's the issue of engagement, ensuring that representatives of people living with disability participate in all of the political processes, but also the DRR processes underway is extremely important. We will be talking and hearing more about early warning for all, so maybe just a few words. UNDRR is co-leading this initiative with the World Meteorological Organization. We are also responsible for Pillar 1 of the Early Warning for All initiative, and this relates to risk knowledge. Understanding who is most at risk is a critical component of putting in place effective early warning systems. And that includes understanding not only the women, men, boys, girls, persons living with disability, but older people as well, and ensuring that they will be assisted and have the appropriate needs met during early warning and during disaster prevention and response measures. But also isolated populations living in far-to-reach areas that may not have access to technology, to mobile phones, or who risk being left behind because of linguistic differences. So really, the risk knowledge component of early warning is all about making sure that we leave no one behind, because these groups have been identified. A final word about early warning is South Sudan is also the focus of a very important project that is being funded by the Dutch government called Water at the Heart. And I note that the Minister of Water is here. We know that much of the early warning work is associated with water, too much water, too little water. And so helping communities really build their resilience to water-related stresses and shocks is at the heart of the project called Water at the Heart. Water at the Heart is a collaboration between the World Meteorological Organization, UNDRR, but also the Red Cross movement. And this is extremely important because it will allow us to get down to the community level where resilience needs to be built and where capacity strengthening, which was mentioned in your speech, Minister, the need to build capacity really needs to be prioritized. I would maybe just mention also that we recognize that putting in place early warning systems in contexts that are considered to be fragile or facing situations of conflict and violence can be challenging. Through the Early Warnings for All initiative and with the Center of Excellence, we are launching on December 4th a handbook on scaling up early warning in fragile conflict and violence settings. And this handbook will help the international community and national governments and stakeholders understand what are some of the options that are available to countries that may not have the full capacity in place, and yet is really critical that their early warning systems are scaled up. And this will be launched on December 4th. And I really hope that you will be able to attend. But in other words, we will use this handbook in our technical support to South Sudan, and we'll work with you to build capacity so that early warnings reaches all countries. So it's a pleasure to work with you. It's a privilege, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Chair. I didn't know that 60 minutes is just a short time. We are only left now with 22 minutes because there's another session coming after us. But now the difficulty is when you bring many experts together, like Lorita and Dr. Artan, she already talked about early warning. I hope she didn't encroach on your topic. Dr. Artan, because of time, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barak. Can you hear me? As you see, I don't have prepared paper, so I will be brief. First of all, thank you for having us here. ICPAC is a Center of Excellence for Climate of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. South Sudan is part of IGAD, so it's one of our member countries. And we support our member states on climate services and disaster risk reduction. And that includes South Sudan. As you know, we support our member countries in different ways, from data modeling, climate services, capacity building, and also on policy, harmonization of policy. Early warning. Actually, when you say early warning, I think is one. Early warning has different components, and my panel co-panel she has shared a few of things. So you have the risk mapping, because everywhere that flood is doesn't mean you have to be worried. There has to be hazard, vulnerability, then you have risk. Also, you need data collection, actual data. Modeling alone doesn't do. Second, you need that warning to reach who needs to be warned. Dissemination. So at ICPAC, we are working with South Sudan in all the spectrum of the four. For example, now, there are global stations called GTS that every morning transmit data to WMO. South Sudan now has only one working station in Juba for a country that's as big as Kenya. We have started a project with UNDP. The launch was a few months ago, but now we're getting into. We'll install 10 complete weather stations throughout the country. The procurement will be done by the UNDP, but ICPAC will do the installation of those stations. And our hope is that with those new 10 stations, there will be better coverage. But still, there's a lot to go for a country on the size of South Sudan on data. On modeling, Right now, we transmit data to South Sudan on we have a hydrologic model that runs throughout the country daily. Actually, it's not a one. It's a several models, and we use a convergence of evidence. We have another model called the Mike 11 of the Danish Institute of Hydrology, a model called Joseph that I've developed myself, and a new model from the University of Berlin is coming in online. So the two models now are running, are operational, the third will join. So that's one thing. And that is, we are pushing to South Sudan every morning. We have what they call the East Africa Hazard Watch that gives you from drought to heavy rains to flooding, covers all the spectrum on. Then we do a seasonal one. We do what they call a GARCOF, Great Horn of Africa Climate Outlook Forum, that we hold every 4 months, 3 in a year. What we want to do, South Sudan, is to take that concept and do a national COP. We do already in Kenya, Uganda, and other countries. The second is that we are expanding the concept of global climate services. So we have done for Kenya. Now Kenya is complete. The act is in parliament. We are working in Uganda. Next to move to South Sudan and Ethiopia. On climate, on risk, actually with help from UNDRR and collaboration that we have with Chima, we have mapped flood risk in South Sudan. But that was at the chorus level. Our idea is to go to down, to use a more spatially high resolution than it was done. Now it's 1 kilometer. That to be used, and is useful at the policy level, to be useful for evacuation. And we need to reduce that to few meters. And that is part of this project sustain. On dissemination, part of this project is that we have an app called Husika that was developed by young guys in Kenya. Basically, is an app on a cell phone that will allow you to give early warning at the community. Everybody has a cell phone, and we'll install that Husika for South Sudan. So we're working on all the spectrum on early warning, and I think it's really a good idea. Secretary General had this early warning for all, and we're trying to do our component in it. Thank you very much. I hope I was brief enough.
Thank you, Dr. Atan. I will rush to my colleague, my friend, Lucas of the World Bank Group. Lucas, the floor is yours if you are available. And I'm afraid that you will have to speak only for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Banak. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Lucas. We can see your photo and also can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, apologies. I have to connect by phone because of poor connectivity here, but it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to speak at this panel. And responding to the key question, Dr. Banak, which you raised about the recent inflow of refugees and returnees coming from Sudan back into South Sudan, in combination with the recurrent flooding which has been affecting South Sudan over the past years. I can speak a bit about our own experience in implementing our World Bank projects in South Sudan in partnership with the government of South Sudan, in particular with the local government board and with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management. This is the Enhancing Community Resilience and Local Governance Project, ECRP2, which is now actually in its second phase. And I want to say that I started working on South Sudan in late 2019, at exactly the time when the first severe flood event in several decades impacted South Sudan. And we've seen 4 successive severe flood events over the past years, covering large parts of the country and effectively submerging these areas for months, even years at a time. And I think this is something that is very particular to the case of South Sudan, is this protracted nature of flooding, which has profound implications on the livelihood sources and the livelihood opportunities of the local communities with whom we are engaging under the project. And part of our project is engaging in the Greater Upper Nile region, in Rubkona, in Unity State, many of these areas that have suffered severe impacts. And many areas have, in fact, remained inaccessible over several months and years. And what this means is that the communities there, they are not just displaced for a few weeks, as in other countries, and then are able to return to their homes. It means that these communities are displaced for a very long time and have to settle in areas which is not their home, have to adjust their livelihood sources. Pastoralists are displaced and they have to become fishermen. And it's not just the people, it's really also the livestock. Many of these communities are, of course, dependent on livestock, not just as assets, but as a social asset. And because of the protracted nature of these floods, we see that migration patterns have changed of livestock. And this has really fueled competition over land and exacerbated existing intercommunal tensions between the communities. So here we see a clear direct linkage between climate and conflict-related risks in South Sudan playing out because the available land is becoming more scarce. Pastoralists are in conflict with other communities. So this is something where we really see the so-called DRM FCV nexus in reality. And this is something where we also try to support with the ECRP project, the Enhancing Community Resilience and Local Governance project, which is implemented in partnership with the IOM, with the International Organization for Migration, who has a strong presence in the field. And effectively, what we're doing with this project is we are supporting the government of South Sudan in providing basic community infrastructure and services to many of these communities that have been impacted by flooding. But we're also strengthening the institutions. So it's about strengthening local governance systems to enable communities and local governments to provide and deliver these services. And we are establishing so-called BOMA and PIAM development committees, BDCs and PDCs as platforms for development. So these are not just project vehicles, but really platforms for other development partners to come in and provide the much needed support to these communities. So I just want to refer to this one specific area where we are engaging in. And in terms of livelihood support to these 2 specific groups, which you mentioned, women and youth. So regarding the latter, I mean, South Sudan is one of the youngest countries in Africa. Many of these people living in these communities are below the age of 18. Many of these youth have been impacted by displacement after displacement because of conflict, because of climate change. And this is really something that has uprooted these communities. And we are trying to engage some of these youth in some specific activities regarding dike rehabilitation. We know that many of these youth become active or take their own initiatives in supporting communities. And I think engaging them in some of these community-driven development processes is very critical. And of course, in addition to providing the necessary tools and equipment, et cetera, we need to provide the basic training to allow these communities to improve the quality of the dikes, to maintain the infrastructure, et cetera, because it's really about creating sustainability and breaking the cycle of build and rebuild, which we see across the country. And regarding women, I mean, we all know that women are of course, among the most vulnerable. And we also see that in the course of flooding, gender-based violence has increased, and women are particularly affected, especially women-headed households. There is a large number of them in South Sudan because of men being involved in conflict and etc. So providing specific support to women-headed households, engaging them in specific livelihood activities is something which we also try to address, but there's many other initiatives, of course. And the World Bank over the past years has massively scaled up its support to South Sudan. Now there's, in sectors in the water sector, there's a large flood management project. There's an energy connectivity project. There's agriculture projects. So really, we are working very closely with the government of South Sudan. And I can say that because of the succession of flooding over the past years, climate change has really been mainstreamed into our programming. And MHADM is a key partner for us in implementing these programs. So let me stop here and thank you again, Banak and honorables and distinguished delegates for this opportunity. I wish you all the best for the remaining COP28. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Lucas, for your time and your inputs. Now, because I'm being chased with time, is there any one burning question to the panelists? Only one burning question, if there is. Okay. Now, Honorable Minister, before you come to the podium, you have only 3 minutes to see what came out of these experts from the World Bank, from the IGAD, ICPAC, from the UNDRR. The issue of youth came out very clearly. And actually, before this side event, one of the youth asked me why you didn't involve youth in your delegation. But I told her that, but you are here. But she wants to be ruled by the government. The government needs to use closely with youth. The women issue, the empowerment, the leadership of the women, the exposure, and then the risk knowledge, which now Lorita and Dr. Atan agreed that should be the way forward. So what do you have to say after all these experts' opinion? Minister.
Thank you very much once again. And of course, when we thought about conducting this side event, is to showcase the impact already of the climate change on our people, which is now very clear that we have talked about it. And also to say the efforts, or to show the efforts of government in terms of remedy on these issues. And then also to acknowledge what the international community and the region that is doing to support the government of South Sudan in this. And indeed, this is what we have already displayed, and it is only thanks that I will have to give to our panelists that have already enriched what we are supposed to be actually showing, ranging from the impact that some of them are already witness of what is happening in South Sudan in terms of this climate change impact in form of flood. Some of them have already been there, and ranging from that and to the efforts, as I said, as the government doing, and then to the knowledge of the risk reduction capacity that we need in South Sudan. Because the most important thing, after we have now realized that there is this impact, what we need is that to, increase the knowledge on this matter for people so that they know it. So the issues that you have talked about them are in place, and I think we have already taken note of it, and together we will move ahead so that we do this. I also want to say that the government of South Sudan will continue to do or to exert more efforts with the help of region and the global, so that we reduce this impact on our people. And of course, I appeal again to the donors, our donors and our partners, to continue helping South Sudan to elevate this problems on its people. And it is a pledging from South Sudan government to continue working with these regional bodies, IGAD, World Bank, and of course UN system on this matter, so that together, as I called from the beginning, we can elevate this suffering. I thank you very much for your participation, the attendees, the facilitators, and the panels, of course, those who are now with us here, and somebody who is now online with us. I appreciate you because you made it to be one of the priorities. That this is why you gave this chance to speak in this side event. Finally, of course, I thank my colleague, the Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation in South Sudan, who have made it to come and share with us this event. And of course, we are doing this job together. He's now handling these issues of waters, which are actually the main component in what we are now doing as in flooding. And we are also doing the rest. So I thank you, Honorable Minister, for being with us. Brother Banak, I also thank you for this, organizing this event, and thank you very much.
Well, the minister has taken my job. I thought that I will be the one that coming to say thank you, but I think he was also mindful of the time. So I would like to repeat that thank you very much, Loretta, Dr. Atan, and then my friend online, Lucas of the World Bank, and of course the tech and the translators. And of course, the African Development Bank and its partners, and especially the AUC for allowing South Sudan to showcase its problem for the first time during COP28. Thank you and have a good day.